Thank you all for sticking with us. I think it's been a great day with a tremendous amount of learning. And I thought I'd got a bit of the having to deal with all the dry stuff around measurement and the importance of evidence and so on. And in fact, I think in almost every single session, we've ended up talking about the importance of measurement and evidence, which means that I can skip through my slides relatively quickly and move to the panel discussion because I'm painfully aware that you've all been listening for many hours now, and I'm really keen to capture some of your thoughts in that final session in terms of where you think this is going to take us over the next few years. I will just do a bit of catching up, in terms of what I think I've got out of the day, and I think the conclusions that we came to at the end of the feasibility study for New South Wales Government on implementing social impact bonds was that they were desirable and feasible, and that both in New South Wales and Australia there were the necessary ingredients, tick the box there. We all agree this is not a panacea. There are lots of ways of delivering services to address social problems. This is just one particular mechanism. You have to do a huge amount of work, and I think when we heard from David today, and I see one or two people in the room which were involved in the feasibility study, we're all painfully aware that you have to put a huge amount of work in to get one of these propositions up. And I think the other thing which at the time we defended a little bit was to say that the Peterborough social impact bond structure was only just one way of doing it, and in fact there are many ways of structuring a social impact bond. But it is flexible and should be customised to policy fields and different jurisdictions. And I think what we've seen in terms of New York and the new social impact bonds in the UK, and in fact the three trials here in New South Wales, they all look slightly different. And I think that's going to be really exciting as we move through into implementation. And then finally, the thing which I concluded as the biggest challenge in terms of evidence and measurement has resonated throughout the day. The title included impact measurement. I think one of the important things to note is that over the last 5 or 6 years, we've all seemed to be on this journey of recognising that measuring inputs and activities and increasingly trying to measure kind of outputs, it wasn't getting anywhere near to where we really wanted to be. And therefore measuring outcomes and ultimately impact is going to get us to where we wanted to be. And that government was actually working with us on this, and in fact recognition that measuring inputs and activities doesn't tell you much at all. We all got rather excited with the idea of unit costing and efficiency, and then one of my big challenges over the last 12 months has been to try and engage the community of consultants and professional service organisations that undertake evaluations which are all around measuring effectiveness, and some huge, great pieces of work done and so on. But we've got to go one step further and actually look at that big picture and measure impact. So once again, I'm skipping through because we've managed to cover a lot of this already, in terms of what makes a viable social impact bond. But I was taken by a discussion some time ago now where we actually concluded that this only works if you can find a point or a zone of incentive optimization where you've got the three main players all talking the same language, which will have developed over time because everybody starts out with different languages around these issues. But at a certain point, then everybody understands the other parties in the equation, and then you start to understand what incentives are going to drive them. Once again, that process of moving towards incentive optimization can only be achieved through an evidence-building process, maximising utility of existing evidence, undertaking relevant measurement activities, and then crucially, what I think we heard from David and so on, and from this New South Wales experience, is the whole role of negotiation or deal building. My green button isn't working. Okay, I can skip that one. That was just basically saying there is a point in the middle, which is incentive optimization. So in terms of measurement challenges, once again, we've covered all this today, and I thought I was going to have to go through this kind of line by line. But I think the slide that David brought up in terms of the first thing they do is try and kind of really kind of deepen understanding of what the problem is, scale and scope, where the costs and benefits are, really trying to understand the theory of change and try and find out within a particular kind of area of activity what works. And when you have a program, what is the treatment effect? And all of these things requires a lot of investment of time, but you also have to engage the right experts in this. I'll come on to some slides later on. But when I first looked at the Peterborough Social Impact Bond, I was fascinated by the fact that there had been a social return on investment measurement exercise done relatively early on in the process. And I was well aware of the work of New Philanthropy Capital, who looked at a system level of problems and looked at what organisations were seeming to have real impact. So I think there's a set of people who are committed to actually undertaking those activities and have got a range of really kind of important skills. I just think we need more of them, and we need to make sure that whatever they do is done transparently, or at least kind of made publicly available as soon as possible. So that's kind of one area of a measurement challenge and an evidence building challenge. The other one which has resonated throughout the day, and this one I will kind of pause on, because this is fundamental to all the work that we've done over the last 18 months to do with social impact measurement, whether it be to do with social impact bonds or other funding mechanisms, or organisations that want to understand their social impact. And this iterative process of trying to understand who your clients are and how you can segment them into different groups, and then how those different groups have different desired outcomes. They may have a general desired outcome around reducing recidivism, but you can relatively quickly identify those segments of the client group, the target cohort, who are those that are most vulnerable, will probably be have the highest risk of failure in terms of going through a treatment program and being successful. The first time we did this in real kind of detail was with Rough Sleepers in Woolloomooloo, and all the organisations and experts that we were dealing with there were absolutely convinced that all 215 people were individuals, and there is no way they were going to actually group them together into high, medium and low vulnerability categories. And we said we can't do our work in terms of helping you measure the social impact unless you reduce that 215 down to 4 or 5 groups. It was a painful exercise over about a 2-week period to tease out what drives risk in terms of a client group and achieving particular kind of desired outcomes. We had the pleasure of working with the microfinance workers from Good Shepherd a couple of weeks ago in a workshop. It was only 2.5 hours, but we managed to kind of go through that process of identifying, as the person walks in through the door, is it somebody that will just go straight through to a loan application and get their loan, buy their second-hand car, continue to work? Or were you going to have to layer a whole series of support programs in order to help them address their particular problem in terms of accessing credit? So that, to me, once again, is a huge kind of challenge in kind of doing that kind of measurement and evidence building. We've talked about cash savings and so on. We've also, quite interestingly for me, started to use words which I've been using for probably, I don't know, too long, since 1981. Whenever you do evaluations of programs and so on, you talk about dead weight, the counterfactual, additionality, and things like attribution. So these are absolutely fundamental to building a SIP proposition, absolutely essential to me as a researcher. And it's just fantastic that we're now, possibly with the intermediary kind of helping the way, maybe some kind of research is kind of helping as well. But these are absolutely crucial kind of concepts, but they come with challenges. Measuring dead weight, what would have occurred anyway, of a particular intervention program, is very, very difficult. And once again, David and Jane, from the work in the UK, have really kind of emphasised how important that kind of step is. Counterfactual, we've not spent any time today talking about whether we should be talking about operating schemes on the basis of random controlled trials or some quasi-experimental method, or whether we can just rely on this is what's been happening for the last 10 years, the number of kids reoffending is going up, offending is going up, those numbers reoffending are increasing, the seriousness of crimes are increasing. So can't we just use historical data to say this is what we're expecting to happen? Once again, there's a whole raft of evidence that you can kind of utilise, including things like meta-studies of particular interventions, which help you fairly quickly understand perhaps how you can approach some of these issues. Must be an end of the day, slow, sticky green button. Okay, the reason why a lot of that is absolutely crucial, because we're bringing investors into the equation. All the stakeholders that are concerned about risk and want to kind of analyse and manage risk, but risk is fundamental to investor behaviour. And it's, once again, just a fundamental rule of investment, unless you're one of these really kind of go-lucky kind of venture capitalists who's willing to kind of just kind of put all their money on perhaps on a person who walks in through the door. But for most investors, they need evidence, they need measurement, they need a track record. They want to be able to kind of look at something which looks like a bit of a history around a particular kind of investment kind of opportunity. A lot of that doesn't exist, but I think you can build it to make a good case to those investors which are open. We've also heard that for investors, on the one hand, you've got to make it absolutely as simple as anything. They just want to have one kind of simple concept which they can kind of understand and see how their kind of investment is going to be used. And removing complexity, just focusing in on one government agency that may kind of have cashable savings, or one aspect of the outcome which relates to one government agency and basically letting the other government agencies free ride. That's a way of reducing complexity and then allowing the investor to understand what's actually required. The only trouble is the investor who wants that simple concept will then hand over whatever the investment opportunity document to their analyst, and that analyst will want to drill into the deepest detail possible in order to understand what's going on. So you have this kind of almost impossible situation of trying to create something which is simple, but then ultimately is underpinned by evidence and is bulletproof. So once again, it's a challenge. One of the things we really was concerned about in terms of the New South Wales feasibility study was the lack of Australian-based evidence, and whether you can actually utilise evidence from other jurisdictions and use that as a proxy for a particular intervention. We felt that was an appropriate, very kind of pragmatic approach. And what we did was basically said, if you take in the best information that's available, the best evidence that's available, you can always use techniques like sensitivity analysis just to see how important that assumption is to whatever the final outcome. So with all this, there are a set of tools there to help you undertake things. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm not too sure how many minutes I've got left, but probably not very many. Just to say that you can put all of this into a framework, and this is the discussions that I used to have with Graham from Uniting Care over the telephone on a Friday evening when he was on his 27th version of the spreadsheet which underpinned their proposition. You can actually pull together a whole set of techniques around logic models, kind of evaluation techniques, cost-benefit analysis, social return on investment. You can build up a social and economic impact model. You can do sensitivity analysis. You can actually give that information to an independent agency, and they can go through an assurance process and test every single cell in your matrix in order to make it work. The previous slide had got basically all that put into one page with the counterfactual. But even if you do that for the proposition, you've also then got the time dimension to add to the tool, because these are long-term investment kind of products. So whatever kind of calculations and measurements you do, you've actually got to measure them over, say, a 5 to 7 year period. And we were doing this with some of the figures for 3 of the particular propositions we were looking at, and trying to find out the long-term cost savings to government, when they would kick in, when you can kind of put in reward payments and so on. Once again, we felt that if you built a robust model you would actually have something which was pretty defendable. Okay, so in terms of, so that's building the proposition and presenting it. Something which resonated with me yesterday from what Dave was saying, that measurement doesn't stop when you're actually going to build the proposition. Measurement flows all the way through the performance management aspect of the term of the social impact bond as well. And you definitely want to do the measurement because it provides learning. And if you're using kind of lead indicators to show that the bond is on schedule to be delivering the rewards, then that's sending signals to stakeholders. And it keeps them engaged and keeps them enthusiastic. And then crucially, there is a measurement component, which is where you do need not only an independent kind of agency to do the measurement, but they've got to be of the highest quality to develop something which is a statistically valid trigger. Because as Trevor was saying, in terms of there are contracts which hold all this together. So therefore, any kind of trigger payment mechanism has to stand up to legal challenge. So you really need to develop kind of really strong measurement kind of techniques. Okay, and then, so where is this all going to take us? We can actually kind of utilise all of the various tools and so on. I was greatly heartened by Prue Goward telling us about New South Wales making government data available in order to encourage the development of propositions, which I think is fantastic. I know that many of the not-for-profits which are looking at these propositions have now developed or are utilising to greater effect their case management systems, fundamental part of actually delivering this. And also these organisations are committed to longitudinal methodologies. These things, programs tend to have long-term impacts which need measuring. So just to finish off, I've only got one more slide if I can get to it. I think we've got to start to look at the UK, not because of the precedent, but because of the ecosystem which they've managed to create, and some of the latest kind of initiatives that they're launching now around addressing things like the cost of evidence building, proposition development, measurement. And we heard about the UK Cabinet Office with their Investment and Contract Readiness Fund. They've got a Centre of Excellence now. We know about the Big Lottery Fund. These are really important developments in terms of how the ecosystem functions. The question is, here in Australia, whether we've actually got sufficient momentum to actually start putting some of that system building infrastructure in place. If we have, I'd like to think that that infrastructure would encourage more academics to get their hands dirty, to quote a phrase of Peter Shergold. I think they often hold a lot of very, very important kind of intelligence on this, treatment effects and evaluation studies and so on. It's also a bridge to PwC and KPMG and the other professional services. And I think the other bridge, which to me is particularly important for not-for-profits, is to potentially encourage them to do what Mission Australia have recently done. They've got a Director of Services Impact, somebody who's actually now responsible for ensuring that they systematically measure the long-term outcomes and impacts of all of their programs. These are fundamental transformational changes for not-for-profit organisations. But I think some of this kind of ecosystem building work probably needs to be thought about very seriously here in Australia to help ultimately get to where we want to be, which hopefully is a thriving social impact bond marketplace over the next couple of years. Thanks.